Here we go. We're getting into the action now. Chapter 15. The Quidditch Final. He sent this, Hermione said, holding out the letter. Harry took it. The parchment was damp, and enormous teardrops had smudged the ink so badly in places that it was very difficult to read. Dear Hermione, we lost. I'm allowed to bring him back to Hogwarts. Execution date to be fixed. Beaky has enjoyed London. I won't forget all the help you gave us. Hagrid. They can't do this, said Harry. They can't. Buckbeak isn't dangerous. Malfoy's dad frightened the committee into it, said Hermione, wiping her eyes. You know what he's like. They're a bunch of dodder-old fools. And they're scared. There'll be an appeal, though. There always is. Only I can't see any hope. Nothing will have changed. Yeah, it will, said Ron fiercely. You won't have to do all the work alone this time, Hermione. I'll help. Oh, Ron! Hermione flung her arms around Ron's neck and broke down completely. Ron, looking quite terrified, patted her very awkwardly on the top of her head. Finally, Hermione drew away. Ron, I'm really, really sorry about Scabbers, she sobbed. Oh, well, he was old, said Ron, looking thoroughly relieved that she had let go of him. And he was a bit useless. You never know. Mom and Dad might get me an owl now. The safety measures imposed on the students since Black's second break-in made it impossible for Harry, Ron, and Hermione to go and visit Hagrid in the evenings. Their only chance of talking to him was during Care of Magical Creatures lessons. He seemed numb with shock at the verdict. It's all my fault. Got all tongue-tied. They was all sitting there in their black robes, and I kept dropping me notes and forgetting all them dates you looked up for me, Hermione. And then Lucius Malfoy stood up and said his bit, and the committee just did exactly what he told them. There's still the appeal, said Ron fiercely. Don't give up yet. We're working on it. They were walking back up to the castle with the rest of the class. Ahead, they could see Malfoy, who was walking with Crabbe and Goyle, and kept looking back, laughing derisively. It's no good, Ron, said Hagrid sadly, as they reached the castle steps. That committee's in Lucius Malfoy's pocket, and I'm just going to make the rest of Beaky's time here as happy as I can ever be. I owe him that. Hagrid turned around and hurried back towards the cabin, his face buried in his handkerchief. Look at him blubber. Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle had been standing just inside the castle doors listening. Have you ever seen anything quite as pathetic? Said Malfoy. And he's supposed to be our teacher? Harry and Ron both made furious moves towards Malfoy, but Hermione got there first. Smack! She had slapped Malfoy across the face with all the strength she could muster. Malfoy staggered. Harry, Ron, Crabbe, and Goyle stood flabbergasted as Hermione raised her hand again. Don't you dare call Hagrid pathetic, you foul, you evil... Hermione, said Ron weakly, as he tried to grab her hand as she swung it back yet again. Get off, Ron! Hermione pulled out her wand. Malfoy stepped backwards. Crabbe and Goyle looked at him for instructions, thoroughly bewildered. Come on, Malfoy muttered, and in a moment all three of them had disappeared into the passageway to the dungeons. Hermione, Ron said again, sounding both stunned and impressed. Harry, you better beat him in the Quidditch Final, Hermione said shrilly. You just better had, because I can't stand if Slytherin wins. We're doing charms, said Ron, still goggling at Hermione's. We'd better go. They hurried up the marble staircase towards Professor Flitwick's classroom. You're late, boys, said Professor Flitwick reprovingly as Harry opened the classroom door. Come along. Quickly now. Wand's out. We're experimenting with cheering chops today. We've already divided into pairs. Harry and Ron hurried to the desk at the back of the room and opened their bags. Ron looked behind him. Where's Hermione gone? Harry looked around too. Hermione hadn't entered the classroom. Yet Harry knew she had been right next to him when he had opened the door. That's weird. said Harry, staring at Ron. Maybe she went to the bathroom or something. But Hermione didn't turn up all lesson. She could have done with a cheering charm on her, too, said Ron as the class left for lunch, all grinning broadly. The cheering charms had left them with a feeling of great contentment. Hermione wasn't at lunch either. By the time they had finished their apple pie and the after effects of the cheering charms started wearing off, Ron had started to get slightly worried. "You don't think Malfoy did something to her?" Ron said anxiously as they hurried upstairs towards Gryffindor Tower. They passed the security trolls, gave the fat lady the password, Flibberty-Gibbet, and scrambled through the portrait hole into the common room. Hermione was sitting at a table, fast asleep, her head resting on the open arithmancy book. They went to sit down on either side of her. Harry prodded her awake. What? What? Said Hermione, waking with a start and staring wildly around. "Is it time to go? Which lessons have we got now?" "Divination. But it's not for another 20 minutes, said Harry. "Hermione, why didn't you come to Charms?" "What? Oh, no," said Hermione. "I forgot to go to Charms." But how could you forget?" said Harry. "You were with us till we were right outside the classroom." "I don't believe it," Hermione wailed. "Was Professor Flitwick angry?" "Oh, it was Malfoy. I was thinking about him and I lost track of things." "You know what, Hermione?" said Ron, looking down at the enormous arithmancy book Hermione had been using as a pillow. "I reckon you're cracking up. You're trying to do too much." "No, I'm not," said Hermione, brushing her hair out of her eyes and staring hopelessly around for her bag. I just made a mistake, that's all. I'd better go and see Professor Flitwick and say sorry. I'll see you in Divination." Hermione joined them at the foot of the ladder to Professor Trelawney's classroom 20 minutes later, looking extremely harassed. "I can't believe I missed cheering charms, and I bet they come up in our exams. Professor Flitwick hinted that they might." Together they climbed the ladder into the dim, stifling tower room. Glowing on every little table was a crystal ball, full of pearly white mist. Harry, Ron, and Hermione sat down together at the same rickety table. "I thought we weren't starting crystal balls until next term," Ron muttered, casting a weary eye around for Professor Trelawney, in case she was lurking nearby. "Don't complain. This means we're finished palmistry," Harry muttered back. "I was getting sick of her flinching every time she looked at my hands." "Good day to you," said the familiar, misty voice, and Professor Trelawney made her usual dramatic entrance out of the shadows. Pavarti and Lavender quivered with excitement, their faces lit by the milky glow of their crystal ball. "I have decided to introduce the crystal ball a little earlier than I had planned," said Professor Trelawney, sitting with her back to the fire and gazing around. "The fates have informed me that your examination in June will concern the orb, and I am anxious to give you sufficient practice." Hermione snorted. "Well, honestly, the fates have informed her. Who sets the exam? She does." "What an amazing prediction," she said, not troubling to keep her voice low. Ron and Hermione choked back laughs. It was hard to tell whether Professor Trelawney had heard them, as her face was hidden in shadow. She continued, however, as though she had not. "Crystal gazing is a particularly refined art," she said dreamily. "I do not expect any of you to see when you first peer into the orb's infinite depths. We shall start by practicing relaxing the conscious mind and external eyes." Ron began to snicker uncontrollably and had to stuff his fist in his mouth to stifle the noise. "So, as to clear your inner eye and the superconscious. Perhaps, if we are lucky, some of you will see before the end of class." And so they began. Harry, at least, felt extremely foolish, staring blankly at the crystal ball, trying to keep his mind empty when thoughts such as, "This is stupid," kept drifting across it. It didn't help that Ron kept breaking into silent giggles, and Hermione kept tutting. "See anything yet?" Harry asked them after a quarter of an hour, quietly gazing at the crystal ball. "Yeah, there's a burn on this table," said Ron, pointing. "Someone spilled their candle." "This is such a waste of time," Hermione hissed. "I could be practicing something useful. I could be catching up on cheering charms." Professor Trelawney rustled past. Would anyone like me to help them interpret their shadowy portents within their orb? She muttered over the clinking of her bangles. I don't need help, Ron whispered. It's obvious what this means. There's going to be loads of fog tonight. Both Harry and Hermione burst out laughing. Now, really, said Professor Trelawney, as everyone's head turned in their direction. Pavarti and Lavender were looking scandalized. You are disturbing the clairvoyant vibrations. She approached their table and peered into their crystal ball. Harry felt his heart sinking. He was sure he knew what was coming. There is something there, Professor Trelawney whispered, lowering her face into the ball so that it was reflected twice in her huge glasses. Something moving. But what is it? Harry was prepared to bet everything he owned, including his firebolt, that it wasn't good news, whatever it was. And sure enough, my dear, Professor Trelawney breathed, gazing up at Harry. It is here, plainer than ever before, my dear, stalking towards you, growing ever closer. Oh, for goodness sakes, said Hermione loudly. Not that ridiculous Grim again. Professor Trelawney raised her enormous eyes towards Hermione's face. Pavarti whispered something to Lavender, and they both glared at Hermione too. Professor Trelawney stood up, surveying Hermione with unmistakable anger. I am sorry to say that from the moment you have arrived in this class, my dear, it has been apparent that you do not have what the noble art of divination requires. Indeed, I don't remember ever meeting a student whose mind was so hopelessly mundane. There was a moment's silence. Then, Fine, said Hermione suddenly, getting up and cramming Unfogging the Future back into her bag. Fine, she repeated, swinging her bag over her shoulder and almost knocking Ron off his chair. I give up. I'm leaving. And to the whole class's amazement, Hermione strode over to the trapdoor, kicked it open, and climbed down the ladder out of sight. It took a few moments for the class to settle down again. Professor Trelawney seemed to have forgotten all about the Grim. She turned abruptly from Harry and Ron's table, breathing rather heavily as she tugged her gauzy shawl more closely to her shoulders. Ooh, said Lavender suddenly, making everyone start. Ooh, Professor Trelawney. I've just remembered. You saw her leaving, didn't you? Didn't you, Professor? Around Easter, one of our number will leave us forever. You said it ages ago, Professor. Professor Trelawney gave a dewy smile. Yes, my dear, I did indeed know that Miss Granger would be leaving us. One hopes, however, that one might have mistaken the signs. The inner eye can be a burden, you know. Lavender and Pavarti looked deeply impressed and moved over so that Professor Trelawney could join their table instead. Some day Hermione's having, eh? Ron muttered to Harry, looking odd. Yeah. Harry glanced into the crystal ball but saw nothing but swirling white mist. Had Professor Trelawney really seen the Grim again? Would he? The last thing he needed was another near-fatal accident with the Quidditch Final drawing ever nearer. Just going to pause it there.